How's it going, everyone? This is the history class. I'm Johan Wanen. Today's topic is World War II. Let's go ahead and get started. World War II is the great cataclysm of our time. The bestiality and savagery humans inflicted upon humans was beyond comparison, and new words had to be created to describe the events in this war because none existed. Holocaust. Through this terrible event, the modern world was shaped. No doubt because of its importance and because of its savagery, World War II remains one of the most popular historical events. I believe it is also popular because it is the classic example of good versus evil, where the bad guys are really bad and the good guys are completely outmatched. And before too long, you can't imagine how the good guys can win, but through some miracle, they prevail. Humans love stories, and there's no better story than World War II. Anytime a student knows a little bit about the topic, it makes it a lot easier for the teacher to teach that subject. And as a result, World War II, from a teacher's perspective, is fairly easy to teach because you know a lot about World War II. Even if you don't think you know anything about the war, like you've never opened up a textbook and you've never read a chapter on World War II, you still know quite a bit about this war. And it's because the influence, both in film and literature, is just wide-ranging. You really can't get away from this subject. The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, they both take place during the Blitz, where the Nazis were bombing cities in England, London, for example. And in order to save their children, families packed them off and sent them with distant relatives, and that's where those two stories take place. You know, if you want to create an atmosphere of unease and foreboding, use World War II imagery. The Hunger Games, Victor's Village, Auschwitz, Arbeit macht frei. In fact, World War II is such a huge influence in literature that it's become its own archetype. Now, an archetype is basically a structure around which a story or a character is built around. So one of the most famous archetypes is the guide. And the guide's job in a story is to take the hero and put them on their path. So you have Yoda and Luke Skywalker, right? You have Dumbledore and Harry Potter. You have Gandalf and Frodo, right? Those are classic archetypes. But World War II itself has become an archetype upon which whole stories are built around. So here is the rough timeline of World War II. And, you know, ask yourself, does this sound familiar to any number of stories? So you have a classic battle of good versus evil, and the story begins with maybe an uneasy peace, and then a villain rises unnoticed and uses fear to exploit and divide society. Us versus them, pure versus polluted. Heroes who embody the opposite traits of the villain are called to action. Democratic institutions are undermined, corrupted, and ultimately destroyed or come under the direct influence of the villain. The villain seems completely unstoppable, but a small band of heroes, outnumbered, facing impossible odds, yet their diversity gives them strength and allows them to prevail. Staying true to their core values, the heroes triumph over evil. All right? That's World War II, and that is a lot of stories. George Lucas borrowed freely from Star Wars. I mean, that guy just opened up a history textbook and just, you know, the story wrote itself for the most part. You take a look at the imagery. Yeah, you know, if you want a bad guy, who's worse than Hitler? If you need a bad guy, all right, and the bad guy's got to be really, really bad. Hitler. Hitler's a good bad guy to use. So, you know, use it. And that's what Lucas did. you take this imagery, he basically copied it. I mean, if you want an imagery of just absolute dread, Nazi rallies. Also, stormtroopers is the German word for soldier in World War I. He just took that. And the helmet from Darth Vader is a World War I helmet. It goes on and on. One of my favorite uses of an author, though, using World War II as an archetype to tell a story is Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling. I mean, let's be honest, if you want to get rich, just take the story of World War II and just put it in different scenarios. You have Space Hitler, you have Wizard Hitler, right? That's what it is for the most part. Voldemort is Hitler. The storyline of Harry Potter basically follows the narrative storyline of World War II, where you have a unseen villain rising to power amid an uneasy truth, an uneasy peace. The villain is going to use fear to exploit the society and divide us versus them, right? Mudbloods, Jews. A lot of the imagery, skull and crossbones, right? The Death Eater's tattoo. And by the way, you know, just throwing it out there. If your side is wearing a skull and crossbone, you might be on the bad guy team. I'm just throwing it out there, all right? If they give you the uniform and it goes, oh, look at, there's a skull and crossbone. Yeah, you're the bad guy, all right? You can't be the good guys wearing that. We're gonna, you know, obviously we'll get into this in the war, but, you know, the trials that take place in Harry Potter mirror the circus trials that took place in Nazi Germany, where the outcome was already guilty, essentially. The tattooing of Jews on their forearm, and, you know, do you see that imagery in Harry Potter with the tattoo of mudbloods on the arms? Yet through a small band of diverse heroes who seem outmatched completely, and there's no conceivable way they can win, pull it off somehow, and it's the diversity that give them their strength. But don't take my word for it. This is J.K. Rowling's. I wanted Harry to leave our world and find exactly the same problems in the wizarding world. So you have the intent to impose a hierarchy. You have bigotry and this notion of purity, which is the great fallacy, but it crops up all over the world. People like to think themselves superior, and that if they can pride themselves in nothing else, they can pride themselves on perceived purity. So yeah, that follows a parallel to Nazism. I wouldn't say it's exclusively that. I think you can see in the ministry, even before it's taken over, there are parallels to regimes we all know and love. J.K. Rowling. What I think as we progress through World War II, that the more you begin to understand the war and the timeline and the intricacies that took place, the more you'll be able to go, wow, that movie, that scene, that's just right from the history books. So you know a lot about this topic even before we get started. The causes of World War II. Well, let me tell you, we spend a lot of time talking about the causes of World War I because it's complicated, right? And it doesn't make a lot of sense. And even if you understand it extraordinarily well, it still doesn't really make a lot of sense. We're not going to do that with World War II. World War II is fairly straightforward. So for all the time that we spent on World War I discussing the causes, World War II, it's real quick and easy. The cause of World War II is World War I for the most part. I mean, a lot of historians think that it's basically the same war. They just took a 19-year break and then continued pretty much exactly where they left off. So we have the Treaty of Versailles. And in the Treaty of Versailles, they're going to impose extraordinarily harsh punishments on Germany. And it's going to fester over this 19-year gap and ultimately explode back into war. So there's three parts that we're basically going to talk about here as far as the Treaty of Versailles goes. Now, just keep in mind that the Treaty of Versailles is this huge topic. I mean, it basically just redraws the map of Europe and shapes modern history after World War I. So it's a huge topic, but we're just going to discuss how it relates to Germany. So Germany is going to be forced to give up land. Now, as you could probably imagine, all of these are really bad ideas. But anyways, Germany is going to be forced to give up land. And especially here, this German corridor where they're going to grant Poland a country. And they're going to want to give Poland access to the Baltic Sea. So they're going to divide Germany right up in the middle, where you have East Prussia on one side and then, Germany on the other side. So the German state's going to be divided by Poland, and also France is going to take a large chunk over here on the west. This is a gift-wrapped present for Adolf Hitler, because what it's going to basically do is put millions of Germans in a foreign country, relatively new and very weak, who are just begging to be rescued. Can some hero come along and rescue the poor Germans who are stuck in a foreign country because of this cursed treaty? And, Hitler's going to be able to use the Treaty of Versailles over and over again to basically grab power. As you could probably imagine, Poland's not going to be able to hold on to that land. Germany is going to have to admit that they are entirely responsible for World War I. Now, in my opinion, this is a bit unfair, because World War I is probably best explained as collective stupidity. Nobody really should have fought that war. It didn't do anybody any good. The war was useless. Germany certainly was a huge part of that war and deserves a large chunk of blame, but sole responsible? No, they're not solely responsible for the war. So the Germans thought that this was very unfair, and of course Hitler is going to be able to use this over and over again. Because Germany was forced to admit that they're entirely responsible for the war, they were forced to pay for the war. And the Treaty of Versailles is going to place on Germany war reparations that totaled about 132 billion Deutschmarks, German marks. So, this huge astronomical sum that was going to cripple the German economy for a fairly long time. And of course, the Germans thought that this was unfair. Hitler's going to be able to use this. The war reparations, in a large part, is what's going to bring about this war, because it's going to devastate the German economy. Now, we talked about the post-war debt structure in the Great Depression video, but just to remind you, the Americans basically refused to forgive the loans that were owed to them by England and France. So England and France are basically going to get that money from Germany, but Germany also lost the war and they don't have any money. So they're going to borrow money from the United States, and loans are basically just going to go around in a giant circle, where the United States banks are going to be giving money to Germany, those German banks are going to be giving it back to England and France are going to go ahead and send that money back to America, and then just around it goes. This is fine so long as American banks can continue to loan out money, but once the Great Depression hits and the stock market drops, well, then the banks can't do that, and now all of a sudden you have a Great Depression in Europe. The Great Depression was bad in America. It was way worse in Europe, and it was particularly bad in Germany. Ultimately, it's the economic instability that is going to lead to political instability, and that's pretty much a historical law for the most part. When you have economic instability, it threatens the political stability of a country, and the worse the economy gets, the more unstable the politics gets. Like France and China and Russia, people are not going to starve willingly. They'll have revolution. What we're going to do now is focus on that middle period between the wars, where you have 1919 to 1939, where the war commences in Europe. And we are first going to focus on Germany. Now, the Versailles Treaty is just a gift that keeps on giving for Adolf Hitler. During World War I, when it became very clear that Germany was going to lose this war, the German people overthrew their Kaiser. So Kaiser Wilhelm II was overthrown, and the Germans created a democracy. Now, there you go, right? That's something the United States, England, and France should have basically supported. You have a willing democracy in Germany, but the Treaty of Versailles is going to undermine this democracy right from the get-go, and the democracy is the Weimar government. So Germany is losing this war. They overthrow Kaiser Wilhelm. The Weimar Republic takes power in Germany, and then the war ends. Now, however, Germany has to settle up, right? The war is over. They are invited to Versailles, and they're going to have to account for the war. But it's not the Kaiser that is summoned to France. It's the Weimar government. So the Weimar government is the one that has to go to France. The Weimar government is the one that has to admit that they're entirely responsible for the war, that they are going to have to pay for the war, that they are going to have to give away large chunks of Germany to their neighbors, where millions of Germans are now going to find themselves in foreign countries. And then the Weimar government is going to have to sign that document, and then the Weimar government is going to have to go back and explain to the German people what they had just been forced to do. And of course, for the vast majority of German people, they don't care about any of that. What they basically see is that their brand new experiment in democracy has basically given away the land, given away the money, and dishonored the country. So right from the beginning, the Treaty of Versailles is going to undermine the democracy in Germany, which of course is, great for Hitler. One of the other things too about the Weimar government is that they're going to send, dozens and dozens of officials to France. But one of those officials was Jewish, democratically elected. But, Hitler being Hitler is going to basically create this whole narrative that the Jews had stabbed Germany in the back and had basically, committed treason. And he's going to hold up the Weimar signatures on the Treaty of Versailles and point to that one Jewish signature and say, here, there you go, right? There's the proof, all right? We were stabbed in the back. Of course, that's not true at all, but, Hitler basically takes a little bit of truth and just spins it into this giant web of lies. He's very good at that, actually. The Weimar government is essentially dead on arrival. The Treaty of Versailles, they have no public support at all. And the economy and the war reparations, and they're going to try to get out of their economic crisis by basically printing money. And that's not a good idea at all. So the hyperinflation that takes place in Germany in between the war years is insane. So 1914, one German Deutschmark is worth $4. That's not bad. All right, that's doable. Right before World War I. After World War I, one American dollar is now worth 14 Deutschmarks. That's worse, but still, manageable. Very manageable. 1921, one American dollar is worth 76 German Deutschmarks. That's substantially bad. It's going to get a lot worse, actually. August 1923, one American dollar is worth 4,620,455 German Deutschmarks. It actually gets a lot worse than that. November 1923, one American dollar is worth 4,200,000,000,000 German Deutschmarks. I mean, that leads to a weird, bizarro land in which you are going to have $10 billion dollar bills. This is a picture of a guy going to buy bread, right? You need a wheelbarrow because the money is essentially worthless. The money was so worthless that people just, threw it out of their pockets like a penny, right? I don't need that penny. And they just threw it down on the ground. And this dude's sweeping up the money. This guy right here went to the hardware store to buy wallpaper, but then realized that the wallpaper was actually more expensive than the money, so he went back home and wallpapered his house with money. It was cheaper. Here are kids playing with a kite made out of currency. Here are kids stacking currency because the currency is cheaper than, blocks. It's in this turmoil that Hitler is going to rise to power, right? Economic instability will lead to political instability. And as the Weimar government basically begins to deteriorate, it creates an environment for Hitler to flourish. So Let me give you a little bit of a bio of this guy. You know, first, here's Hitler's mom. Nobody really thinks of Hitler having a mom, but, he's human, so he has a mom, so there's Hitler's mom. Here's Hitler as a baby. Here's Hitler's dog. Here's Hitler's cat. That's Kittler. No, I'm joking. Here's Hitler as a baby. Yeah, he doesn't look evil there yet, right? Maybe a little bit. I don't know. It's the bowl cut. Here's Hitler at about your age, 13. Yeah, it's getting there now at this point. All right, it's getting there. Pretty close. Now, Hitler has this really interesting biography that is kind of common with dictators. So he had his father was just basically worthless, just a terrible human being. And his mother basically spoiled him rotten. So you have this overcompensation between the mom and the dad. And, I don't know what it does, that kind of mix, but man, it messed this kid up. Maybe it was already messed up to begin with, it's hard to say. One of the things about psychology is that you really can't analyze somebody unless they're in the room with you. So as a result, you cannot diagnose historical figures. But man, it's really tempting to try to diagnose Hitler. I mean, there's a lot to work with. Historians don't really know if he ever had a friend. He was kind of an odd person, kept to himself, definitely a mama's boy. Like, that kid loved his mama. And when she died, he was still, a fairly young man. He basically just lost his mind and more or less pinballed through life. He wasn't really able to find any kind of direction until World War I broke out. Hitler just kind of found his place there, man. He didn't really belong anywhere except in war. And it's interesting hearing the accounts of his fellow soldiers when it comes to Hitler. I mean, there was no doubt that Hitler was about as brave a soldier as anybody's ever seen. He just seemed to be completely unconcerned with the death that was happening around him. That being said, he also just absolutely unnerved his fellow soldiers. The guy was brave, but they didn't really like that guy very much. It was just some weirdness about him that kind of rubbed him the wrong way. He was a weird guy. Everyone smoked back in that day. He didn't, He was a vegetarian when most people wouldn't even thought about it. So, those are just two little quirks that he had. He did really well in World War I. He was a messenger and, got awards and, for bravery and valor. And then something terrible happened. The war ended and it sent him back into the civilian life again. And, here we see Hitler pinballing through life yet again. And early on, he tried to make a living being an artist. So here is an example of some Hitler art. There's always at least for me anyways, an unnerving aspect of Hitler artwork. And part of it has to do with the fact that he drew all these public places, but never drew people. No people in the public places. He has submitted his work to the Vienna Art School, and they were like, dude, you got to draw people, all right? And they rejected him. And, he tried to get into the Vienna Art School again, and they rejected him again. And that's why I blame all of life's problems on the Vienna Art School. Come on, Vienna Art School. Let Hitler in. Can you imagine Hitler as an artist instead of a politician? The world would have been so much better. This is a better way to go. Dude, if you are evil, art may very well be the best place for you. How about instead of killing a bunch of people, you go ahead and do crazy art? Crazy art's fun. Hey, look at that person. That person's nutty, maybe out of his mind, maybe even a little bit evil. But he's an artist, so it's good, all right? But no. Thank you, Vienna Art School. Hitler is not going to be an artist, and now he's going to likely, now he's going to be a politician. And, if you're evil, don't be a politician. That's bad. Hitler's ultimately going to join a fringe radical political group in Germany called the National Socialist Party, Nazi Party for short. And, you know, before he joined, it was really, you know, it's not really going anywhere. It was more like a drinking club for the most part. By the way, I mean, can Hitler not take a photograph where he doesn't look evil? That's an evil-looking photograph there. But it's in the Nazi Party where Hitler really just comes into his own. Now, let's just be fair here, right? You don't almost take over the world unless, you know, you're a genius. And although Hitler is absolutely evil, he's also a genius, right? So, evil genius for the most part. There are two things that Hitler was able to do, maybe better than anybody else who ever lived, right? Just the 1% of the 1% of the population. He was a brilliant public speaker, near spellbinding, right? Just captivating. But Hitler was also a just magnificent liar. Hitler was able to lie maybe better than anybody who had ever lied before. It's kind of a weird thing to say. But let me give you an example of a Hitler-esque lie. Now, I'm going to give you this example, and you are going to promise me that you are not going to use this information for bad things, okay? So if you are, go ahead and just stop the video and fast forward it about 5 minutes, and then go ahead and hit play again, so that way you don't do terrible things to the world. So here is how to, well, an example of how Hitler lies, for the most part. So, almost without exception, the vast majority of my students cannot write at all. Just horrendous. It's pretty bad. The writing is just, you know, mostly a collection of words, and it looks like somebody is just holding up a paper and just hitting it with a pencil to punctuate it. There's just no rhyme or reason for anything. You don't write with purpose. You just string things together. It's an absolute mess. But it's not your fault. I mean, your teachers have let you down from the get-go, and if they had just worked a little harder or showed you what to do, you would be better able to write and not be in the situation that you're in. And that's a Hitler lie there. What he does is he wraps up a little bit of the truth around this gigantic lie, and what holds it all together is the fact that you want to believe it, okay? Now, the truth is that you are surrounded constantly by teachers who would have helped you with your writing if you had only applied yourself, if you had only worked a little harder. Your quality of writing is entirely your doing. Now, it's true that the vast majority of my students struggle with writing. There's no doubt about it. But that's your fault. You could have done advanced homework, you could have gone to tutoring, you could have applied yourself, more initiative. This is a craft that you could have gotten good at if you had worked at it. And the vast majority of you up to this point haven't worked at it. And as a result, you're not very good at it. And, you know, it's going to become a hindrance for you. And that's the thing. People don't like to believe that it's their fault. They like to blame other people, right? I don't want to believe that it's my fault that I can't write. I want to believe that it's somebody else's fault that I can't write. And that's what Hitler is going to do to the Nazi people. He is going to wrap up a little bit of the truth around this gigantic lie. You know, the Germans lost World War I. They threw the entire nation state behind that war, their economy, everything, and they lost. And the German people did not want to believe that it was their fault that they lost. So Hitler is going to tell them that it wasn't, right? You didn't lose that war at all. The Jews lost that war for you, right? They stabbed us in the back. They committed treason. They surrendered the armies. I was a soldier. I was there. I saw our victorious armies on the field, and they went to Versailles, and they signed that document, and they stabbed us in the back. We won, and they took it away from us. Right? So this is a lie, but it's one that the Germans already wanted to believe. And Hitler is going to feed the population these types of lies over and over again, and it works, right? People don't want to believe that they are to blame. They want other people to blame, and that's what Hitler gives them, victims. it's in fairly short order that Hitler is going to take over the Nazi Party. And then what you have in that post-war period is Germany torn into two parts. You have the far-right fascist Nazi Party, and then you have the far-left Communist Party. And one of those two parties is going to take over Germany. The Weimar government is just a placeholder at this point. And Hitler is going to basically present himself to the Democratic Party as the lesser of two evils, right? You can't trust the communists at all, better to trust me. And as a result, he is going to find himself as chancellor in 1933. And now what we see is just the most brilliant series of maneuvers, really the textbook version of how to destroy a democracy. Hitler becomes chancellor. He immediately burns the Reichstag. Now, the Reichstag is the German version of Congress, right? It's their symbol of democracy. And the very opening weeks of his chancellorship, Hitler burns it and then gets on the radio and blames the communists for it, right? Basically telling the German people, the communists are out to destroy the country, and in order to save Germany, I need more power in order to fight this enemy. And Hitler understands this innate human truth. And the guy's scary, right? How he understands just the darker aspects of humanity. But he does. And one of the darker aspects of humanity is the fact that people will trade their freedom for safety. If you make them scared, they will willingly trade their freedom. And that's what Hitler's going to do by burning the Reichstag. He is going to be able to claim more power, and with that power, he destroys his political enemies and is now more firmly going to hold on to political power. What he next does is called the Night of Long Knives. He gets together this huge list of everybody in the Nazi Party who ever criticized him, who were maybe too popular and could possibly challenge him. And all in a single night, those people are quietly arrested and then killed. So he is going to consolidate power in his own political party now. What Hitler needs next, however, is another perceived enemy, right? His real ones have been destroyed. The communists were basically killed. His competitors in the Nazi Party were murdered. So he is going to invent now another enemy for the German people, and this is the German Jews. So Hitler is going to use this population to basically rile up the German people. Kristallnacht. This is the Night of Broken Glass. This is a very important date in the Jewish calendar. And it's the date the Holocaust begins. Now, again, it's so nuts how this guy, again, just understands that dark aspect of humanity. He is going to basically teach people how to kill. And Hitler somehow realizes that if you tell a person to go kill another person, they're not going to do it, right? People don't do that thing. People don't do these things. But you can teach a person to kill. And what you do is basically get them used to small acts of violence, right? And then you ratchet it up over a period of time while heaping on praise all along, right? So in Kristallnacht, nobody gets killed. They're just going to go into the Jewish community and break some glass. No, that's just it, right? Just break a couple panes of glass. Just show the Jews that we're watching you, right? We're watching you. If you're up to anything, right? No more committing treason and terrorizing the country anymore, right? So we're going to break some glass to let you know that we're on to you. And then he heaps praise on the people for doing it. And, a couple weeks later, go into the Jewish community and maybe you push somebody down, right? Nothing serious. Nobody's going to get hurt, seriously. You just go in there and push somebody down to the ground. Just let them know that we're watching you. So you are ratcheting up the violence and teaching these people to kill, right? You can do that, and Hitler does. Nazi ideology, which is essentially social Darwinism, where he is going to basically create this mythic master race, the German people, and purify that race from any pollution, right? Pollution in race, pollution in thought, right? So books that challenge Nazi ideology are going to be burned. Obviously, the curriculum is going to be warped, and it just really ruins an entire generation of people. What's also nuts about this entire situation is that Hitler is going to out-New Deal Roosevelt, where, you know, Roosevelt's going to try to get the country, the United States, out of the Great Depression by basically shoveling money at the problem. But Hitler takes a bulldozer and shovels money at the problem and immediately puts Germans to work rearming the country. And, you know, just seemingly overnight, Germany is going to be out of the Great Depression, and Hitler's the one that did it. And he did it by giving these people jobs, building weapons. Now, this also is a giant problem, you know, Hitler rearming, but the way he rearms, and again, it's the Versailles Treaty. It's the gift that keeps on giving for the most part. So the Versailles Treaty stipulated that Germany had to reduce its military by 90%. And as a result, you know, all these soldiers and all these officers had to go. Well, if you're going to get rid of 90% of your soldiers and 90% of your officers, I mean, who do you keep, all right? You keep the best of the best. You keep the best soldiers. You keep the most visionary generals and officers. And when Hitler became chancellor, he is going to have this core of brilliant officers in the military. And these officers have basically reinterpreted war. These officers are going to fight a modern war, a war of movement and mechanization. And it's a massive advantage for Germany, where basically every other country in the world is going to try to fight World War I again, right? A static war of trenches. Germany alone is going to fight this brand new style of warfare, one of movement. Thank you, Versailles Treaty. What Hitler's now going to do is that, you know, after basically capturing complete control of power in Germany, he is now going to begin to manipulate the leaders of the countries around him. And he does it in an extraordinary way. He just seems to understand, again, that darker aspect and what these people fear the most. Having just fought this terrible world war in 1914, the last thing that England and France and the United States wants to do is to fight another world war, and Hitler knows that, so he is going to use that fear against these countries. Hitler is out to take over the world, period. Okay? He wants to take over the world, and he is going to use this reluctance to have another world war to achieve a string of early victories. In 1936, German troops move into the demilitarized Rhineland. That was in direct violation to the Treaty of Versailles. It should have sparked war right then, but England and France, they do not want another world war, and they basically reasoned, well, you know, it is German land, so if Hitler takes it back, what do you do, right? So they let him do it. As a result, Hitler is going to be emboldened, and he is going to continue to try to take more land. He is going to move his soldiers into Austria without a shot fired and annex that country. He then demands the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, and here, you know, England and France, they're getting a little worried here, and they're going to have a conference at Munich. And here, Hitler is going to tell the Allied powers that what Germany needs is Lebensraum, living space, right? He needs living space for the German people. And if he is given the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, then, you know, that'll be it. He's done. He won't need any more land. And the Allied powers are going to give in to Hitler's demands. This is called appeasement. What Hitler realizes, and the Allies don't, is that on paper, right, France has the largest army, but Germany has the modern army. And Czechoslovakia also has a fairly modern army, and that's not an army that Hitler wants to fight on the battlefield. if he could find a way to take it without firing a shot, that would be all the best. And the Sudetenlands, that's the high ground. That's the forts that protect Czechoslovakia. And if he can take the Sudetenland, then it would be like giving a burglar the key to your front door. I mean, they're going to get in. They're going to take all of it. And sure enough, just as soon as the Allies give Hitler the Sudetenland, Hitler is going to roll his armies into Czechoslovakia and take that country without firing a shot. And, you know, also absorb that army as well. So, you know, the Allied powers kind of realized it a little bit too late, but, you know, it's that Aesop fable where the person saves the snake and the snake bites him anyways. And when the person asked him, "Why did you bite me?" the snake said, "I'm a snake. What did you expect me to do?" All right? Hitler's a wolf. What do you expect him to do? He's going to be a wolf. He's going to continue to eat. And if the Allied powers refuse to stand up to Hitler, well, then he'll keep on taking land without a fight. What Hitler wants, though, is a fight. He wants a war. Dr. Seuss. And the wolf chewed up the children and spit out their bones. But those were foreign children, and it didn't really matter. Adolf the Wolf. And her shirt says, "America first." Right, so the United States is not getting involved in this. It's too bad. Hitler's absorption of Czechoslovakia is going to finally awaken England and France to the danger that they're in. And they realize that there's never going to be enough for Hitler, that he's going to continue to demand land and take. And as soon as Hitler takes Czechoslovakia, he demands Poland. And England and France now finally draw that line in the sand, that if you invade Poland, there'll be war. And that's what ultimately is going to set about war in Europe. Hitler's invasion of Poland, which brings England and France into the war. In our next video, we'll talk about Russia in the post-war years and then start the war in Europe. Thank you all for watching. This is The History Class. I'm Mr. Wannen. Stay safe.